I sat there, alone in my office, trying to focus on the task at hand, but everything just felt wrong. The steady hum of the city outside my windows, usually something I could block out, was now the only sound in the room. I should have been looking over the plans for the new luxury tower, but I couldn't. My mind wouldn't let me. Clara had been distant. Not in a way that screamed, something's off, but in small, subtle ways. She'd been more tired lately, her responses to me shorter, colder. And the late nights at work? They'd become routine. I'd stopped asking about them a while ago, told myself it was just stress or the pressure of her job. I trusted her. At least I thought I did. But then today, out of nowhere, I got that email. I didn't know who the sender was, just a random email address, nothing familiar. But the subject line caught my eye. For your eyes only. It didn't make sense. I hesitated for a second, a knot forming in my stomach. Maybe it was spam. Maybe a mistake. But something told me to open it. I clicked, and the first image hit me like a freight train. It was Clara. Laughing. Genuinely laughing, her head tilted back in that way that always made her look younger than her age. She was standing with a man I didn't recognize. He had his arms wrapped around her, and they looked happy. Too happy. I didn't want to believe it. I told myself it was just a friend, some work colleague, but my gut told me I was lying to myself. I clicked to the next photo. This time, they were kissing. My wife. Kissing someone else. A man who wasn't me. The room felt like it was closing in on me. I couldn't breathe. I didn't want to see more, but I had to. So I clicked again. The third photo showed Clara leaving a high-end restaurant, her hand intertwined with the stranger's. My wife. Holding hands with another man. I sat there, my fingers frozen on the mouse. Every ounce of blood in my body seemed to rush to my head. The ground beneath me felt like it was shaking. This couldn't be real, I kept telling myself. But it was. The timestamp, the detail, the way the photos captured her so clearly, it was real. My marriage was a lie. My wife was cheating on me. I couldn't make sense of it. Clara and I had been through so much. 15 years. We'd built this life together. The house, the vacations, the dinners, the late-night talks. I had given her everything I could. My time, my energy, my love. And she was throwing it all away. I felt a sudden rush of anger, like a hot ball of fire in my chest. I should have been screaming, throwing something, anything to release the pressure that had built up inside me. But I couldn't. I just sat there, staring at the screen, my mind racing. I wanted to believe it wasn't real. I wanted to tell myself I'd been set up, that someone was messing with me. But deep down I knew. I knew my wife. I knew that look in her eyes, the way she'd been so distracted, how she'd stopped trying, how she'd been hiding something. And now I had the proof. I didn't move for a while. I just sat there, watching the photos flicker in front of me. Then, the office door clicked open. It was Laura, my assistant. She stepped in with a stack of files in her hands, but stopped when she saw my face. Mr. Reddington, the architects are waiting for the meeting, she said, but I didn't even look up. I couldn't. I didn't have the energy. My mind was still racing, my heart still pounding, and all I could think about was Clara and the man in those photos. I waved her off, not bothering to explain. Cancel the meeting. Send them home for the day. I need to be alone. She hesitated. But sir, Send them home, Laura, I said, my voice colder than I wanted it to be. She didn't argue, but I could tell something was wrong. She saw it in my eyes. She nodded and left. The moment she was gone, I sank back in my chair, my mind finally catching up to what I was feeling. Anger. Yes. Betrayal. Obviously. But there was something else, too. A strange, hollow emptiness. The kind of feeling that comes when everything you thought you knew falls apart in one swift, merciless blow. I didn't know what to do next. I could drive home and act like everything was fine. I could face Clara and pretend I didn't know. But I knew I couldn't. I couldn't let her get away with this. Not after everything I'd done for her. I stood up, suddenly restless. I had to do something. Anything. I walked over to my desk and grabbed my jacket. My mind was already whirring, thinking about what I could do next. How to confront her. What to say. But before I even left the office, something else caught my eye. Clara's car. It was parked outside the office building. That sleek black coupe of hers. A sinking feeling hit me. She was here. Was she meeting him right now? Maybe even while I was sitting here, in my office, learning the truth? I clenched my jaw, forcing the thought out of my mind. No. I wouldn't confront her yet. I needed to be smart about this. I needed to gather more information. I had to be methodical. She would pay. But not now. Not until I knew everything. With a final glance at the photos on my screen, I turned and walked out of the office, my heart still pounding in my chest. I didn't know it then, but the path ahead of me would be filled with so much more than just confrontation. I was about to discover just how deep the lies ran, and how far I was willing to go to make her pay. The drive home was like moving through quicksand. The world outside felt distant, like it wasn't even real. Cars passed me by, people walking down the street, couples laughing together. Everything just felt so fake, so meaningless. I used to envy those couples, seeing them walking hand in hand, carefree, like they had everything figured out. Now, I just saw it all as a lie. Everything I had worked for, everything I had believed in, had been nothing but a facade. By the time I reached home, my mind was in a storm. I pulled into the driveway, the large, dark house looming ahead of me. I could see Clara's black sports coupe parked by the garage. It hit me like a punch to the gut. She was already home, probably waiting for me, putting on that fake smile she always wore when she didn't want me to know something was wrong. I could already hear her voice in my head, rehearsing her excuses. It was just a work thing, babe. Nothing to worry about. But I wasn't a fool anymore. I knew exactly what was going on. I didn't want to go inside. Not yet. The thought of facing her, of looking at her and pretending everything was fine, felt like I was suffocating. But I had to. If I didn't confront her now, I might lose my chance to make things right. I couldn't just sit here and let her walk all over me. Not anymore. I parked the car, my fingers tight on the steering wheel. I sat there for a second, my chest tight with a combination of fury and hurt. I wanted to throw something. I wanted to shout. But I didn't. I knew I had to keep calm. If I was going to make her pay, I needed to be methodical. I walked through the front door. The house was quiet. Too quiet. Clara. I called out, my voice flat, almost robotic. She appeared from the kitchen, still in her work clothes. Her hair was neatly styled, her makeup perfect, the way it always was when she'd come home from a long day. But this time, I saw it differently. The way she looked at me, the way her smile didn't reach her eyes, it was all fake. "Hey, love," she said, her voice warm, like she hadn't just spent the last few days sleeping with some other guy. "How was your day?" I didn't answer right away. I just stood there, staring at her, trying to keep my emotions in check. The temptation to just spill it, to say I know, was overwhelming, but I held it back. "Same as usual," I muttered. "How about you?" "Busy." She nodded, already starting to unbutton her jacket like she was trying to put the conversation behind her. "Yeah, just a lot of work stuff. I'm exhausted, honestly." I watched her for a second. Exhausted from what? More meetings with Alex Barron. Her movements froze. For just a moment, I saw panic flash in her eyes. It was brief, but it was there. It was all I needed. "What?" She turned to face me, the calmness in her voice faltering for a second. "Don't act like you don't know who I'm talking about." "I've seen the photos, Clara." Her face paled. She took a step back, like she was physically trying to distance herself from the truth. You're spying on me?" Her voice was a mix of disbelief and anger. "What the hell is wrong with you, Victor? You're so paranoid." "Paranoid?" I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "No, Clara, I'm not paranoid. I'm just not blind anymore. I know what's going on. I've seen you with him. I know where you've been." Her eyes widened for a split second, and that was when I knew. She couldn't even keep the lie going. She took a deep breath, the kind of breath you take when you're about to come up with a story. Victor, I don't know what you're talking about. There's nothing between Alex and me. We're just friends. I've told you that before. I wanted to laugh, to tell her how ridiculous that sounded, but I held it in. Really? So, the romantic dinner, the hotel stays, the private messages, those are all just friendship stuff, huh? Her face tightened. I could see the gears turning in her mind as she tried to come up with some new excuse. She was good at it. She had been for years. But this time, it wasn't working. I could see right through her. You're making a big deal out of nothing, she said finally, her voice sharper. You're just jealous. You don't trust me anymore. Maybe you should think about that. Jealous? Was she serious? This wasn't about jealousy. This was about betrayal. But I didn't argue. I just stared at her, letting the silence stretch between us. I didn't have to say anything more. She knew I knew. After what felt like an eternity, she sighed, throwing her hands up in defeat. Fine. You want the truth? Yes, I've been seeing someone else. Alex is. He's someone I'm close to, someone I connect with. You don't listen to me, Victor. You haven't for a long time. Her words stung, but I didn't let her see it. Instead, I let the anger build, feeling it flood through my veins. She wasn't even sorry. She wasn't even ashamed. I don't know why you're acting like this, she continued, her voice softer now, almost pleading. You should have known things weren't right between us. You're always so focused on work, always so distant. You never paid attention to me. My jaw clenched. So that was it, huh? She had the audacity to blame me for her cheating? For her lies? I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. The coldness in my gaze said it all. I'll give you time to think about it, but I'm not leaving him, she said, her voice still defiant, like she thought she could win this somehow. Good, I muttered, my voice low and controlled. Because you're not getting away with this. Not now, not ever. I turned and walked out of the room, my heart racing, my fists clenched. The truth was out. Clara had betrayed me, and now she would pay for it. But I wasn't done yet. I had a plan. And I would make sure it would destroy everything she thought she had. I didn't sleep that night. The bed felt too cold, too empty. I could still hear Clara's voice echoing in my mind, but now it was hollow. Empty. The words she'd said, you should have known things weren't right between us. It made my blood boil. She was still trying to shift the blame onto me, like I was the one who had been checked out of our marriage. Like I had deserved this. But the more I thought about it, the more the weight of her betrayal settled in. This wasn't just a little mistake. This wasn't a bad phase we'd go through and work out. She had deliberately chosen someone else over me, and that was something I couldn't ignore. I couldn't let her get away with this. I spent the rest of the night pacing the living room, staring at my phone, trying to decide how to handle this. I was torn between confronting her again, getting in her face and demanding answers, or taking a more calculated approach. The second option felt better. If I was going to make her pay, I needed to do it right. No mess, no emotional outbursts, no letting her see how badly she'd hurt me. I needed to be smart, cold. I decided to start by following the trail. Clara wasn't the only one lying to me. She wasn't the only one with secrets. If Alex Barron was involved, then he had to have a life outside of her. A social media presence, friends, connections. If I dug deep enough, I could find out everything about him. I spent the next few hours digging through her phone. At first, I hesitated. I shouldn't have to do this. I shouldn't have to violate her privacy to get answers. But then I remembered those photos. The hotel stays, the late nights. I remembered how she'd blamed me for being distant when all along, she had been the one pushing me away. So I did it. I cracked her password in less than 10 minutes. Her dog's name and her childhood street. Stupid. It was like she wanted me to find the truth. What I found made my stomach churn. Her conversations with Alex were explicit. No, they weren't talking about their friendship. They were planning weekends together, secret rendezvous, even discussing getting away for a trip to Lake Forest. That wasn't just an affair. It was an affair with intent. They were talking about the future, about how they would make things work when she left me. I could feel the fury building up again, but I held it back. I wouldn't go after her with fists. I wouldn't let her see how much I was suffering. I needed a plan. A real plan. I clicked through more of her messages, trying to get a sense of how deep this went. The more I uncovered, the colder my heart became. This wasn't just a betrayal, it was a calculated decision, one that she had made long ago. She had made her choice. And now, I was going to make mine. By the time the sun started to rise, I had everything I needed. Clara had left a trail so wide that it was almost laughable. There was no way she could talk her way out of this. I knew where she had been, what she'd been doing, who she'd been with. And if she thought I was just going to walk away from all of this without a fight, she was wrong. I stood up from the desk, the weight of what I had to do pressing on me. It wasn't about justice anymore. It wasn't about getting back at her. It was about something deeper. Something I couldn't even name yet, but I knew it would define everything that came after. I didn't speak to Clara for the rest of the day. She tried calling me a couple of times, sending a few texts, asking if I was okay. But I didn't answer. Let her stew in her guilt. Let her wonder if I was finally waking up to the truth. That evening, when she came home from her meeting, I was waiting. She didn't even seem surprised. "Victor," she said as soon as she walked in. Her voice was tight, defensive. She knew what was coming. "We need to talk." I stayed quiet, watching her from my spot on the couch. I'd been planning this moment in my head all day, thinking about how I wanted to confront her, what I wanted to say. But when it came down to it, all I said was one word: sit. She hesitated, but then complied, taking a seat across from me, her face already a mask of defiance. She wasn't going to break down. I could already tell. She'd been practicing how to keep her cool in front of me, how to spin the situation so she didn't come off as the villain. But there was no escaping this. I held up my phone, showing her the photos, the messages. Her face went pale as she saw everything I had found. She started, but the words didn't come out right. She was too stunned, too caught off guard. I cut her off. "Don't say anything. Don't even try to explain. I've seen everything." I let that hang in the air for a moment. "You've been planning this, haven't you? You've been seeing him for months now. And not just seeing him. You were making plans to leave me. You were making plans for a future with him. A future without me." Her silence told me everything. I didn't need her to speak, because I already knew the truth. She had been planning her escape from me for a while now. The woman I had loved for years was already gone. And I wasn't sure when exactly she'd left me, but I knew she had made the decision long before I ever found out. She opened her mouth again, but this time, there was no deflection, no anger. She was just defeated. She knew she'd been caught. "Victor, I never meant to hurt you," she said quietly, like she really believed that. But it didn't matter. I couldn't hear her. I couldn't hear her lies anymore. "Don't," I said, shaking my head. "Don't even try. You made your choice. Now it's my turn." She blinked, confusion flashing across her face. "I'm not going to beg you to stay. I'm not going to ask for another chance," I continued. "But you're going to regret this. I'm going to make sure you do." The days after that conversation with Clara felt like a blur. I didn't want to engage with her. I didn't want to hear her excuses or see her fake apologies. I just needed space, time to think. My mind was already running at full speed, spinning out 1,000 different scenarios. I knew I had to act fast, but I didn't want to make the mistake of rushing into something I couldn't control. Clara kept her distance after our confrontation, but I could feel the tension hanging in the air. The house felt different now, like the walls were closing in, suffocating us both. She still tried to act normal, putting on that smile, talking about her day as if nothing had changed. But I could see it. Her eyes would flick to me in the hallway, just a split second too long, like she was waiting for me to explode, like she thought she could talk me into forgiving her. But that wasn't going to happen. I couldn't even look at her without seeing him. Alex Barron. That image of her laughing with him, kissing him, holding hands with him at that fancy restaurant, it was burned into my brain. And the worst part? She hadn't even tried to hide it. She hadn't even cared enough to keep their affair a secret. She thought she could pull it off, thought she could destroy everything we had, and I would just let it slide. She had underestimated me. It was time for the first move. I couldn't just sit around and stew in my anger. I had to make things happen. I spent the next few days assembling everything I needed. I reached out to my friend, Kevin, who worked in tech. Kevin was the kind of guy who could find anything out. He'd helped me with personal security stuff in the past. Nothing illegal, just some protective measures when I'd gotten a few threats at work, but this time, I had a different request. I needed dirt on Alex Barron. I needed to find out everything about him. Where he lived, what he did, who his friends were. Kevin didn't ask questions. He just did his thing. He sent me everything I needed in under a day. I had a full profile on Alex, his social media pages, his work history, his personal connections. I even had his home address. The guy had been so careless, so confident that no one would ever find out about him, but he'd left a trail wide enough for anyone to follow. I had everything. I wasn't going to make the mistake of going in blind. I wasn't just going to confront him and hope for the best. No. I needed leverage. I needed to make sure that when I took action, it would be devastating. I needed to make him feel the consequences of what he'd done. But I didn't stop there. I had another job to do. Clara. She hadn't earned any more of my trust. I had to be sure that she wasn't planning something behind my back. So, I did what I had to. I installed a tracker on her car. Nothing major, just enough to get a sense of where she was going and who she was meeting when she wasn't with me. I didn't want to be caught off guard again. When I showed up at my office the next morning, the cold, clinical nature of the place almost felt comforting. Everything was so structured, so predictable. But I wasn't in the mood for business that day. I sat down at my desk, opened up the information Kevin had sent me, and started making plans. I had to think carefully about what would hurt the most. Public humiliation. Exposing Clara's affair to everyone? That thought twisted something inside of me. It felt good. Too good. I could already picture it. Her at a dinner party, her friends all gathered around, laughing, oblivious to the fact that their little queen had been playing them all along. And when the news hit, when the truth came out, I would be there, watching her fall from her pedestal. I didn't care about revenge for the sake of getting even. I cared about making sure she realized how badly she had messed up. I cared about making her understand that betrayal like this would never go unpunished. I took a deep breath, reminding myself that I wasn't doing this out of rage. This wasn't about throwing a tantrum or losing control. I was taking back control. I was going to make sure that her little affair with Alex Barron destroyed her. Destroyed them. The first step was simple. Cut her off. Cut off her access to anything I had built. I wasn't going to be the nice guy who let her walk away from this without consequences. The house, the accounts, the luxury life she had been so accustomed to? Gone. When she came home that night, I was already in motion. I was waiting for her when she walked in, just like the night before. But this time, I wasn't going to let her off the hook. "Victor, we need to talk," she started, her voice nervous. She must have known by now that things were unraveling for her. "Yeah," I said, my voice calm, too calm. "We do." I handed her a stack of papers. "I've made some decisions. I've already talked to a lawyer. I've already started the process. This is over, Clara. You're not walking away from this without consequences." Her face went white. "What are you talking about?" Her hands trembled slightly as she reached for the papers, but she didn't dare touch them. "I'm talking about everything. The house, the money, the life we built. I'm cutting you off. You've had your fun with Alex, and now it's time for you to face the consequences of your actions." Clara's voice cracked. "You can't do this, Victor. This isn't fair. I didn't mean for it to get like this. I'm sorry." I could feel her desperation now, but I didn't care. I wasn't about to fall for it again. "No. You don't get to apologize now. You made your choice, Clara. And now I'm making mine." I stood up, walking toward the door. "I'm leaving for a while. When I get back, we'll finish what we started. But don't think for a second that I'm going to let you walk away from this unscathed." I walked out of the house without looking back, the weight of my decision heavy in my chest. But for the first time in days, I felt something like relief. This was just the beginning, and I was ready for whatever came next. The next few days felt like a surreal blur. Clara was in a panic, running around the house, calling my name, texting me constantly. I didn't answer any of her calls or messages. I wasn't about to give her the satisfaction of seeing me bend. 4 years, I had given her everything, and now that she had taken everything for granted, it was time for me to take control back. I spent the first night away from home at Jake's place. His basement, which was always a mess of old military gear and half-empty beer bottles, was exactly the kind of place I needed right now. I didn't want comfort. I didn't want sympathy. I just needed to think. "You're really going through with this, huh?" Jake asked, tossing me a beer as he dropped into his usual chair across from me. I took the beer, popped it open, and nodded. "I have to. She's crossed the line. And now she's going to pay for it." "You think you can take everything from her?" Kevin, who'd been quiet until then, spoke up. "I mean, I get why you're doing it, man. But there's a point where you have to be careful. Revenge can be a slippery slope." I took a long swig from my bottle, feeling the cool burn of the alcohol as it slid down my throat. "It's not about revenge. Not really. It's about her realizing that she doesn't get to just walk away from this. She doesn't get to betray me and then expect everything to be fine because she's sorry." I saw the look on their faces, the concern. Jake was still a soldier at heart, and Kevin was more of a quiet thinker, always looking at the bigger picture. "I get it," Kevin said slowly. "But there's a difference between making her regret it and losing yourself in the process. Don't go too far, man. Don't let her break you. That's exactly what she wants." I stared down at the beer in my hand, turning it slowly. Kevin's words hit harder than I expected. It was true. I wasn't trying to destroy Clara's life for the sake of destruction. But I wasn't going to let her get away with this, either. I'd never imagined myself as a man who would exact revenge, but now that I was here, it felt like the only option. "I won't lose myself," I said finally, trying to convince myself as much as them. "I'll be smart. I'll play it cool." Jake raised his bottle. "Just don't burn yourself out, man." I didn't respond. I wasn't really listening. In my mind, I was already planning my next moves. Back at home, Clara's desperation was becoming unbearable. She had tried to apologize, tried to make excuses, but every time she came near me, I could feel my anger rising. She had even gone as far as sending me texts with fake promises about working things out, as though she thought I'd forget everything because she was sorry. It was almost laughable. The house was quiet now. I stayed in the guest room, keeping my distance. But I couldn't avoid the feeling of betrayal hanging over everything. Every time I walked past her, I saw her eyes darting nervously, but there was no real regret. It was all about saving face. She didn't want to lose the life I had built for her. That's all this was to her. I didn't go to work for a couple of days, deciding to lay low. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that I had to keep moving forward. I'd made the decision to start with Alex Barron. It wasn't just about confronting him, it was about making him feel every ounce of what he had done to me. He'd been careless. He'd believed he could have Clara without any consequences. So now it was time for him to understand that there were always consequences for actions like his. I called Kevin again, asking him to dig deeper. "We need dirt, Kevin. We need something that will make him regret crossing me. It's not just about the affair anymore. It's about the principle. This guy needs to know what it means to mess with my life." Kevin didn't ask for details. He just said, "I got you." The following week, Clara continued with her attempts at manipulation. She'd try to talk to me over dinner, acting like nothing had changed. But every time she tried to get close, I pushed her away. I wasn't going to let her guilt trip me into forgiving her, even if it made things harder. The more she played the poor me card, the harder I became. One night, she caught me sitting at the kitchen table with my laptop open. "Victor, I need to talk," she said, her voice trembling, though she tried to mask it. I didn't even look at her. "There's nothing to say. We've already talked. Please. I'm so sorry. I never meant for any of this to happen. I was just confused. You weren't there for me, And I... Stop, I cut her off, finally looking her in the eye. Don't pretend like this is about me not being there for you. This is about you making a choice. You chose him. You threw everything away for him. Don't try to make it my fault. Her face fell, the tears she had been holding back finally spilling over. But it didn't move me. She had lost her chance at sympathy the moment she chose to betray me. I don't want your apology anymore, I said, my voice hard. You've made your choice. And I've made mine. It was the following weekend when I got the information I'd been waiting for. Kevin had come through again. Alex Barron had a few skeletons in his closet. Nothing criminal, but enough to make him squirm. There was a messy breakup with an ex-girlfriend who could testify to his manipulative behavior, a few accusations about him using his company connections to exploit people. Nothing he'd been caught for, but enough to make a few people very uncomfortable. But there was one thing that caught my attention. A business venture of his, a luxury property deal, that had gone south. There were whispers of shady financial practices, things that could have made him vulnerable if they came to light. That was my leverage. I wasn't going to destroy his career, but I would certainly make him think twice before ever crossing me again. That night, I made my move. I set up an anonymous meeting with a journalist, a contact I knew from a few years back. I gave him the documents I had, the information that tied Alex to questionable dealings. I didn't want the guy to know everything. I didn't need to give him too much. Just enough to make him look bad, enough to scare him into backing off. I texted Clara later that night. A simple message. I'm handling things. This is only the beginning. She wouldn't understand. But it didn't matter anymore. The week that followed felt like a strange kind of waiting game. Clara tried to act normal, though I could see the strain in her eyes. She knew something was happening. Knew that I was no longer just sitting back and taking it. She wasn't the only one feeling the pressure. Alex Barron, too, was starting to feel the heat, though he didn't know it yet. The journalist I'd contacted was good. I'd given him just enough to make Alex's name dirty, and I had a feeling he would be able to take it from there. It wasn't a matter of ruining him outright, but giving him enough of a scare to make him reconsider his actions. Word gets around, and I wanted Alex to feel like he was being watched. Watched by people who could dig up every dark corner of his life, every secret. I wanted him to sweat, to wonder if the life he was so confident in was about to collapse. But that wasn't all. I had been paying close attention to Clara's movements, watching her every step. The GPS tracker was a godsend. I knew exactly where she went every time she left the house. And the more I saw, the more I understood just how far she had gone in hiding her affair. It wasn't just Alex she'd been spending time with. She'd also been meeting with some of her friends. Friends I had trusted, people who I had known for years. And it wasn't just the late nights or the work meetings. These weren't just casual get-togethers. No, they were planning something. I could see it in the timing, in the places she'd been going. That was the first domino to fall. It was Thursday evening when Clara got home. She walked in, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor, but the second she saw my face, she froze. I was sitting at the kitchen table again, papers scattered in front of me, though I wasn't looking at any of them. I was watching her, studying her every move. "Victor," she said, her voice strained, "what's going on? Why are you acting so distant?" I didn't answer right away. I just looked at her, trying to keep my expression neutral, trying not to give away how much I had already uncovered. She was still trying to play the innocent, confused wife, but I could see right through her. It didn't matter what she said, how she said it. She was already lost in this game, and she didn't even know it yet. "Where were you today?" I asked, my voice cold. Clara hesitated for a moment. "Just out with some of the girls from work," she replied quickly, but I could tell there was a slight quiver in her voice. She wasn't as confident as she used to be. I narrowed my eyes, not buying it. "Out with some girls from work, huh? Funny, because I checked your location earlier, and it said you were meeting with Alex." Her face went pale. For a moment, I thought she might try to lie, but instead, she just blinked, caught completely off guard. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. I wasn't done yet. "You're not even trying anymore, Clara. Why don't you just admit it? You're with him, aren't you?" Her lips trembled as she tried to hold it together. Victor, please. Enough, I interrupted. I don't want to hear any more of your excuses. You've been lying to me this whole time. And not just lying about Alex. You've been lying about everything. She looked like she was about to cry. Tears welled up in her eyes, but they didn't move me. Not anymore. I can't believe you're doing this to me, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I leaned back in my chair, keeping my eyes locked on her. You did this to yourself, Clara. And you've been dragging everyone into it. You're not just hurting me. You've been lying to your friends, to your family. And now, I'm going to make sure they all know the truth. Her eyes widened. What do you mean? Oh, don't worry, I said, a small smile tugging at my lips. You'll find out soon enough. And so will Alex. I've already made sure of that. Clara's face twisted with fear. She didn't need to ask any more questions. She knew I wasn't playing games. Victor, please don't. Please, she started, her voice cracking. But it was too late for please. Too late for apologies. I'm done, Clara, I said softly. You've made your bed. Now you'll lie in it. I left the house later that night. I had set things in motion, but I didn't want to stick around and watch it all unfold in real time. I knew she'd try to stop me, try to call me, try to beg for forgiveness again. But I didn't want to be anywhere near her when the consequences hit. I went to Jake's place again, needing the quiet and the distance. But when I got there, Kevin was already waiting for me. He had a look on his face that told me things were moving faster than I'd anticipated. I got the call, he said, nodding toward the door. The journalist is running the story. It's out. My heart skipped a beat, but I didn't let my emotions show. How's it looking? Kevin grinned. Let's just say, Alex Barron's phone is blowing up right now. And not in a good way. I sent a couple of people who owe me favors to make sure the right eyes see it. It's going to get ugly for him. A sense of satisfaction washed over me, but it wasn't relief. It wasn't victory. Not yet. Not when there was still more to be done. I hope you're right, I said, taking a seat across from him. Because Clara still thinks she can get out of this. She thinks I'm bluffing. Kevin took a swig from his beer and leaned back, looking almost amused. I think you've made it pretty clear you're not bluffing. You've got her right where you want her. But don't forget about her friends. You might want to take care of them too. I nodded. Kevin was right. It wasn't just Clara who needed to be held accountable. It was the people who had helped her keep this affair hidden, who had shielded her from the consequences for so long. They would all pay in the end. But the best part? Clara had no idea what was coming next. The next few days passed in a strange sort of slow motion, like everything was winding down to some inevitable, thunderous end. Clara tried to reach me, of course. Her calls and messages came non-stop, but I didn't bother answering. I didn't need to hear her apologies or more of her excuses. She'd made her choice, and now she was going to face the consequences. I was no longer just a man wronged. I was a man who was taking back control, who was taking back everything she had tried to tear down. The satisfaction of seeing her squirm wasn't what I expected. In fact, the feeling of her losing everything, the life she thought she could take for granted, was almost anticlimactic. It wasn't as sweet as I thought it would be. It was just the natural consequence of her betrayal, the inevitable fallout that had been coming for a long time. But there was one more thing I needed to do. I had made sure that the story about Alex Barron's business dealings went public, just as I had planned. The journalist I had worked with didn't disappoint. The article had hit the right outlets, and within hours, Alex's name was being dragged through the mud. The shady property deal was now public knowledge. His ex-girlfriend's accusations were suddenly a headline, and there were whispers of other businesses he had been involved in that weren't so clean. Alex was scrambling. He didn't know who was behind the leak, and that was the point. He didn't need to. All he needed to know was that everything he had worked for was on the verge of crumbling down. I watched from a distance, detached, almost like I wasn't involved in any of it. There was no satisfaction in watching him flounder, no triumph in seeing him sweat. But there was something else, a sense of cold, hard justice. He had thought he could just waltz into my life, sleep with my wife, and walk away without a care in the world. But now, Now, he was learning that you don't get to do that without consequences. Then came the final blow. Clara, now desperate and cornered, came to me one last time. She showed up at the house, unannounced, her makeup less perfect than usual, her clothes wrinkled, as if she hadn't been sleeping. I opened the door, and there she stood, almost a shadow of the woman she once was, broken, exhausted, and finally stripped of her arrogance. "Victor," she said, her voice trembling. "Please, can we just talk? I can't take this anymore. I've lost everything." I stood there, silent, watching her. I knew what she was doing. She was playing the victim now, trying to make me feel bad for her. But there was nothing left to say, nothing left to feel. I took a step back, allowing her to enter the house, but I didn't invite her in. I didn't need to hear her beg anymore. "You've lost everything because of your choices, Clara," I said, keeping my voice even, calm. "You're not sorry. You're just scared." She took a step forward, hands shaking. "I never meant for any of this. I was wrong. I know I was wrong. But Victor, please, I can't. This is all falling apart. I'm losing everything. You've destroyed my life. Please, you've got to fix this. Please, I'll do anything. I'll end it with him. I'll fix it, I promise." I almost laughed, but I didn't. She still didn't get it. She still didn't understand that there was no going back, no fixing what was already broken. Not after what she had done. "You don't get it," I said quietly, shaking my head. "You don't get to decide when this ends. I'm the one who gets to choose now." I watched her struggle to hold it together. She was losing control, and there was no way I was going to give it back to her. I had worked too hard to get here, too hard to make sure that the world knew exactly who she was and what she had done. "Please," she begged, but I could hear the desperation in her voice, the rawness, and it still didn't make me care. Not anymore. I had already made my peace with everything. I had already accepted what she had done, and I was beyond the point of caring about what she wanted. The truth was, I was done. Done with the lies, done with the manipulation, done with everything she had taken from me. "I'm not going to fix this," I said, my voice final. "You did this to yourself, Clara. This is all on you. And you'll live with the consequences of your actions, just like I've had to." For a long moment, we just stood there, looking at each other. It wasn't anger that I felt anymore. It was just emptiness. She was a stranger to me now, someone I couldn't recognize. The woman I had loved was gone, and in her place was a person I didn't know. She nodded slowly, her shoulders slumping as if a weight had just crushed her. "I understand," she whispered, her voice breaking. And just like that, it was over. I turned and walked out of the room, not giving her another glance. I didn't hear from Clara after that. The next few weeks passed by in a haze of legal documents, negotiations, and the quiet settling of everything she had taken from me. The house, the assets, the life we had built, everything that had once been ours was now mine. And the best part? She had no claim to any of it. The affair had cost her more than she realized. It had cost her everything. As for Alex, his world wasn't any better. The scandal about his business dealings spread like wildfire. It wasn't enough to completely ruin him, but it was enough to make sure he knew that the life he had been building on lies was unstable at best. I didn't need to hear from him either. He would get the message. He was no longer a part of my life. It had been a long road. And while I didn't feel the satisfaction I thought I would, I did feel something else. Something quieter. Something more final. I was free. Thank you for watching this video to the end. What did you like most about this story? Write your answers in the comments. See you in the next video.